I'm excited to share this podcast interview I did with Kelly Foss from the Millennial Minimalists. This was such a fun conversation where together we covered the financial basics that honestly, most people never really learn. What I love about this interview is that we tackle those real, practical questions that people and viewers of this channel are often embarrassed to ask. Like, how much should I actually be saving? What's the difference between saving and investing? And how do I avoid overspending when everything seems so expensive these days? One of my favorite parts of this interview was when we dive deep into some of the actionable strategies you can actually take away today. The first example was pay yourself first approach that can transform your finances, and also how to handle irregular income if you're a freelancer, smart credit card strategies, and when you might actually want to work with a financial advisor like myself. One thing Kelly mentioned in this podcast that really stuck out to me was how she was initially embarrassed to ask certain financial questions. She thought that everyone else had it figured out, and trust me, they don't. These are the exact same questions I get from business owners and high-income earners all the time. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by personal finance or wondered if you're doing things the right way, this conversation is completely for you. Take a listen to the interview, and if you found value in it and want to continue the conversation, my email will be in the description below. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the interview.
So we have been friends for over a decade now, which is really
That's right.
cool. I think we met in 2014. And over those years, I've asked you so many money-related questions. And so I'm excited to have you finally on the podcast today to share your insights and also answer some common questions that our listeners may have.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Kelly. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, definitely. So in those years, I've asked you many questions, and there have been many moments, Harry, where I've been embarrassed to ask you certain questions. I'm like, oh, I'm asking you this. I know this is a little basic. And you would always respond, oh, well, trust me, like most people ask these same questions. I was like, really? And it gave me some peace of mind. So I really appreciate that. I think a lot of us, we move through this world thinking that everyone knows how to save, everyone knows how to invest, and we're just like the only ones, right? But that's not the case.
No, 100%. There's a lot of people that will ask me any kind of question, very successful people with even the most basic questions. So I'm here to provide some simple answers for you guys and make sure that you have the right knowledge.
Awesome. Awesome. So I wanted to start off by stepping back for a moment and thinking about, when it comes to building a savings and investing plan, do you suggest that we start with our why?
Yes. I mean, that's kind of the key principle for almost doing anything. Why work out? Why go on this trip? Why, start a family? Let's say you need a purpose. So for everyone listening here, why would you want to save? Why would you want to invest? And if you don't have that sort of North Star, you're not really going to have this plan that's going to be on track. You're not going to say, that's my goal and I'm going to do everything I can to get there. So I always would ask a client or a prospect, why are you saving? What's motivating you? And what's the key message that you want me to help you with, right? So always start with a why. I think it applies with almost everything you do.
Yeah. I mean, I always relate it back to closet decluttering. When we've shared this on the podcast many times, but when someone's going to their closet and they start decluttering, they're decluttering without intention, right? So we always suggest going in and ask yourself, hey, what are my lifestyle needs before you start pulling pieces out and donating them or selling them? Say, hey, for example, do I go into the office? Do I need work outfits? Do I work out? How often do I work out? Do I need multiple outfits? Or maybe I just need a couple. Do I go out to events throughout the week? Do I need a gown? Do I need a suit? All these questions. And so once you answer those questions, you can then make decisions about your clothes, right? So I'm assuming the same applies for finances as well.
Yeah, of course. You need various things. You need that little black dress, or you need that suit, and that's going to be the bedrock kind of your wardrobe, or the pair of jeans or what have you, something cozy, something formal. These could relate to things like, what investments do you select, where do you put them, savings or checking accounts, credit cards, which we'll get into at some point. But yes, there's definitely start with your why, how to construct an intentional financial plan as well. I think that's really critical.
As we say, minimalism can be applied to every area of our lives, simplifying all areas. I think finances was one of the main areas that I started simplifying when I adopted this lifestyle, and I'll get into that. But can you share some tips on how we can avoid overspending? And maybe you can share some examples and changes that you've made in your life.
Yeah, this is a very common question I get, especially these days with, the cost of living and how much housing is costing us and nights out and everything. So, overspending, you can take one of two approaches here. The first one most people might think of first would be setting a budget. So, you make X dollars a month, set aside Y for spending, and then try and do that. What I find is a lot of people will spend from their paycheck without having saved anything first for themselves. So, in this case, you might see money in your checking account and say, you know what, I think I have extra money, so I might as well go spend it. So some people have a hard time setting a budget. It's really, really difficult, especially if you have lumpy income. So if you're trying to set a budget, I find most people, it's like pulling teeth. It's very, going to the dentist or what have you. They don't really want to set a budget. So what I would say is kind of flip it a little bit. What we normally would say is pay yourself first. So for example, you get your check on the first, you take 10% of that, whatever hits your account is immediately gone to savings. And after that, in theory, you should say the rest of it could be used for spending. If you spent that 90% remaining, you haven't technically overspent at all because you still have that 10% set aside. So it's a really easy way for most of us who might just say, simplify it, automate it, make it really intentional, take that 10% right off the top. As soon as it lands in my checking account, put it away. And then at least I know with clarity, the remainder could be used for spending.
And all your expenses, of course.
Yes. Yeah. There's always that comes through. Your bills will come through regardless of how much money you make, right? So the idea there is 10% should leave you with enough to at least pay the fixed amounts. If that 10% isn't right for you, you can always adjust it up or down. But at least, the principle here is to make sure that the minute you get paid, try and put some away, because then at least in your mind, the remainder you could say is for fixed and variable spending.
So what I personally do is when I get my paycheck, I have an account that automatically puts a portion in a separate account so that I don't touch it. And I'm also an independent contractor. So I collect tax that needs to be paid back to the government. So I basically see the second account as the government's accounts. Do not touch. And then, like you said, I actually save 15%. I try to save 15% that just goes to savings, right? So that I'm not touching it. But yeah, I mean, it's especially, and I've mentioned this on the podcast, how it's especially hard to save in our world today. I mean, there's so many temptations from, the checkout area at a brick and mortar store to all of the websites online, that easy one-click buy. It's just so easy to overspend. And especially in our world of inflation, it's out of this world right now. I mean, I go to the store and milk costs $7 for 1 liter. I'm like, what is wrong with this world that we're living in today? So how can we best manage our money, especially during this time of inflation?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of people that were impacted, in 2022, 2023. We all were victims of it. Inflation basically means the prices of everything increase. Unless you have more money saved or your money's working hard, you're losing purchasing power every day. So, that $7 milk might have cost $5 a few years ago. So there's a huge gap there. And there's really a couple things you can do to make sure that you're at least keeping pace with inflation. You want to make sure that your cash that you have on hand is at least earning something. So for example, most people might come to me and say, Harry, what should I do with my checking account? And it's a really useful place. Obviously, you're spending money, you get money in and out from it. The downside is that it pays 0%. So right away, your inflation rate, let's say right now it's 2%, you're losing 2% of your money every year just to inflation. So you want to take that checking amount and probably put it either to savings or investments, which, we'll talk about it shortly. But as long as it's working for you, you won't lose that purchasing power. And then of course, when you have things that are increasing significantly, it's somewhat rare because the Bank of Canada wants to keep it, pretty even. If things do go significantly higher and you are seeing everything I need is increasing, most people will just cut back on their variable spending. Most people don't want to do that, but unfortunately, that's sort of the levers you have unless you can somehow make more money, which is pretty difficult, right? So keep your savings not necessarily in a checking account. You want to make sure that it's earning at least something. And that way you're not losing too much purchasing power over time.
Right. Something that I've done recently is I've gone through all of my auto subscriptions right?
Yeah.
Everything that I have my credit card attached to, all those extras that actually aren't needs. I love there's certain podcasts that I'll pay for. And then I'm like, you know what? I don't need this. So I've started to let go of those things. And
Yeah.
I find that again, as I get older, I start buying more things and thinking that they're needs when really they're just wants. So I have a needs and wants list actually on my computer in my bookmarks bar. And that's really, really helpful to remind me what I actually need and what actually are just wants and what I can let go of. So letting go of certain subscriptions. I always do an audit of my home so I know what I already have. So I'm not tempted to buy things that I don't need. And of course, I always pause before I buy. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you can do to save. And I'm just being more mindful of my spending. I think some people, they'll continue to spend the way they've always spent. But, if your income is not increasing, unfortunately, you're going to be spending way more money.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're living with intention, you're trying to put your purchases and try to make the right decisions. When inflation is increasing, your fixed costs will increase and you can't get away from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to pay your rent, you have to pay your utility bills and what have you. So it's those wants that might take a back seat. So
Mm-hmm.
those become much more intentional in inflationary periods. So when things like that happen, you want to just make sure you do have exactly what you just said, your needs list and your wants list, and really try and, put them in a hierarchy. What do I absolutely want? And even see if you can wait 24 hours, like Lauren said, wait 24 hours, see if it still makes sense to you, especially in a period of inflation.
Yeah, I mean, wait 24 hours, wait 30 hours. If it's $30 or more, the minimalists say wait 30 hours.
There you
And
go.
usually you wait those hours and then you're like, I don't really need it, right?
Right.
So yeah. Oh gosh, we live in a very tempting world today. So you kind of touched on this, but how much should people save from their paycheck each month? What percentage of income should we save? And then which percentage should we use for fun as well? One of our listeners asked this, and of course, that's based on the expense to income ratio, of course.
Yes. So that's great. So there's two schools of thought here. The one I mentioned earlier was 10% of your net income. So whatever hits your account, just put 10% away. You mentioned 15. Some might be, more comfortable with 5, but the idea is take some money as soon as you can and save it. That way it's gone. If you can even put it into an investment account, so it's even further away than just your savings account, that increases your discipline. The other rule that, some of your listeners might have heard of is the 50-30-20 rule, which is taking your money and splitting it 50% to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to savings. Now that's just sort of a really good way of saying, I don't want to overspend on needs. I don't want to overspend on wants. So if you can bucket your money like that, then at least you have a rule to kind of live with. Now, in a time where housing costs are very expensive, enjoying your life is paramount. Millennials tend to favor experiences over objects. Some of those experiences might be increasing significantly. So those 30% to wants, you might bump up into that upper echelon there. So that's where you also want to make sure you have some money on the side, just in your savings account. But either, you can pick one lane to really go with, either 10% as soon as the money hits your account, or take an overall budget and say 50-30-20 for needs, wants, and savings.
Okay. So another listener of ours asked this question: for freelancers with irregular income, that was me at one point, what's a simple system they can adopt to manage cash flow, set aside taxes, and also save?
Yeah. So most of the clients I work with are business owners, and they also have lumpy income. So the revenue is not exactly going to be 5,000 per paycheck or anything specific. So what you have to do is sort of try and smooth out those lean months with savings. It's very difficult for a freelancer, especially if you're earning a little bit of money, to save enough to, have a cushion during those lean months. But what you want to do is, let's say you earn money quarterly. So things are coming in every 3 months. The other 2.5 months that you need to support yourself, obviously you need to have savings for. So you need to sort of write out maybe a timeline that says, okay, if I get paid on January 1st and my next paycheck is April 1st, what expenses do I have in between then? So let's put that 50% as we just said. If I also want to enjoy my life, which of course we all do, 30% needs to go to wants. And then from there, you're sort of saying, okay, that's my baseline that I need to have on hand. And if I can save anything in addition, that's obviously just gravy. So it's really just trying to put things onto a timeline and say, okay, here's where I'm anticipating money coming in. How much money will I need until the next paycheck? Sometimes that's very difficult to project, especially if you're a new freelancer or your work is incredibly lumpy. But really, you just want to have like 3 to 6 months of savings on hand if you can, but make sure that you always have enough on hand to get through those lean months.
So, one of my first careers was working as a model, and sometimes your paycheck doesn't arrive for 90 days.
Yeah.
So, that was me back in the day. And also, Lauren, same with her, being in real estate. Sometimes the payment doesn't come for actually 6 months to a year. So,
Yep.
she's had to, yeah, she would really appreciate this advice.
Yeah, there's as you mentioned before, saving HST. I know that could be tempting because you need to remit it at some point, but you might have to dip into it to pay for something in between. It's very difficult. It takes a lot of discipline. You can kind of chat with an AI agent about it and just say like, what should I do in this case? What would you recommend? Things like that. But really, you just want to take as much discipline as you can. As a freelancer, you have to be a little bit more disciplined than a salaried employee.
Yeah, I pay taxes or HST and income tax quarterly so that I get ahead of it, which is
Yeah.
great. So I know that, I give that money to the government every quarter so that I'm not touching it. So, little strategy I have. Back to basics. What is the difference between saving and investing?
So they're kind of synonymous in the sense, but they have a different approach, right? So saving is, let's just say, it's like having obviously money on hand, but the idea is that you might not need it today, but you probably will need it tomorrow. What I would say is saving is what you do when you don't put your money at risk. So for example, you need food in your pantry, you need spare clothes just in case, you might need a second pair of jeans in case the first one rips. That's the idea of saving, just making sure that you have zero risk backup. And that's sort of your baseline. Investing is where you put your money at risk, of course. But the idea there is if you're taking risk, you should get some additional reward. So we always recommend a balance of both. You want to have that savings, like I might have mentioned earlier, 3 to 6 months or so. Keep it in cash just in case you need a replacement, appliance or something. You might get into a car accident. So you never know what expenses you might need today. And the last thing you want to do is sell your investment to pay for it. On the other hand, once you've kept your savings at a certain level, you can afford to put your money at risk. So that money that's at risk should be earning a nice stable rate of return. And then hopefully that money's making more money, et cetera. So the first bucket, saving, just make sure it's, low risk, as much cash as you can. And then the investing side is the stuff that you might want to save for a longer period of time, put it at risk with a higher rate of return.
Very good advice. So how did you personally get started with investing, Harry? For beginners, what are some simple ways they can invest without actually picking stocks? Because I think that's where our mind goes. We're like, oh, picking stocks. It's like, no, you don't need to start there.
You'd be surprised how many people start with stock picking. They might have heard it, from friends, family, social media. They say, I have this hot stock and you should buy it, things like that. I rarely would encounter somebody that says, from day one, I put it into a passive index ETF and started a responsible journey. If you're starting at 20, 21, 22, you might just feel like it's gambling because it's just such a small amount of money that you're starting with. That 10% we mentioned earlier might be $100 or $200 or $300. So it's like, is an amount of money that's important at that point, but it might seem like a small amount. So some people might just say, I'll try to double it. I'll try to gamble with it. I'm going to pick the next NVIDIA. We'll see what happens, right? And if I lose it, whatever, I'll make it back. So I would say most of the people I talk to that are really getting started, like me, actually started picking stocks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I was at York, actually, I did a second degree. I joined the York Finance Club. They had a lot of stock picking ideas and sort of chat between everybody there. I said, okay, I'll take some of the money I have. Wasn't that much, try and buy some of these stocks that these guys are recommending. And some of them worked, some of them didn't. It was really a good crash course in, this is really risky. It could go up 5% today, down 10% tomorrow. Pretty challenging, but I would say, honestly, most people started with stock picking. And then if you can kind of get through that social media, TikTok, Instagram, finfluencer kind of area, I would say that a lot of people might say, I'm done with stock picking. I really don't want that risk. Give me something that's nice and easy, that's going to grow. And that's where you start seeing passive index ETFs. the low cost. You don't have to make any decisions. Even now these days for, places like Vanguard, iShares, Fidelity, they will have a single line item ETF that you can buy that owns everything. So it's incredibly simple to get fantastic returns, but most of the time, I've seen people actually start with picking stocks and sort of move away from that over time.
Interesting. So when you're picking a couple of stocks, I'm sure you only put in a little bit of money, but at least you learned the administrative background of it, how to do it, how it works, right? I remember my father, he got me this book that was basically a how-to for finances. And I was so grateful for it because it was kind of like Finances for Dummies. And I was like, everyone needs this book because it had so many incredible, just easy tips, just the basics that we should all know. That's interesting that you started that way. Now, what are some red flags we should be aware of when it comes to investing? I mean, what are some things that we should know about and kind of step away from?
Yeah, red flags are everywhere. What the regulators are trying to do is remove as many as they can. So you want to source your information from credible people. So known sources, regulated people like myself, those people tend to have standards that we're held to. We can't just say whatever we want. We have to back it up with evidence. And we are, regulated by people. So we can't just claim anything. The biggest red flag usually that would see is something that says, this is guaranteed. It's guaranteed to go up. It's guaranteed to give you 10%. If you hear that word, there's only one exception where that's actually allowed, and that's in a guaranteed investment certificate.
Okay.
So if you see GIC, that's actually guaranteed, but only up to 100,000. Everything else, there is no guarantee. It is not going to be there in every single scenario. So if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, Kelly, I have a stock, it's guaranteed to make you money, red flag.
Run away.
Flag right there.
Yeah.
And if they say a pressure tactic, so for example, that person says, Kelly, you have to buy it. I really, you have to buy this. And there's any sort of pressure tactic, either done by friends, family, or people at a financial institution, step back, try to take that breath, try to say, why is this person pressuring me into something? So it's actually somewhat prevalent. There was a study released recently from our regulators about the sort of bigger banks in Canada, and a lot of the sales representatives there felt sales pressure. So from the top, they say, Harry, you have to sell X mutual funds today. And then I have to try to get that done or try to pressure the people I'm talking to into doing it. So there is pressure involved. I'm sure many people listening to this have felt it at some point, like, hey, you should get this credit card. Hey, you've just been approved for this, so I'm sure you went through it.
We can increase the number of dollars on your credit card, which I guess is good for your credit. I think it's good for your credit when you raise the limit. But
yes.
Yeah.
But as long as you're not under pressure. So right there's an example, right? Somebody can come up to you and even give you good advice. But if it is under pressure or duress, or you're not comfortable with it at that moment, don't do it. Step back, talk to your friends and family, go on Reddit, find out your research sources and see if that's actually true, because that offer is not really going to go away instantly. It's not a one-time thing. And the worst case is you wait a month or two for the next offer. So don't feel that there's any pressure. If there is, that's absolutely a red flag.
I could see people, raising that limit and then overspending, right? And so, so that could be dangerous. So one thing I wanted to mention is diversification. I listen to a lot of finance podcasts, and actually one of my favorite podcasts this morning. This is not a finance podcast, but Scott Galloway is one of my favorite podcasters. He's a professor at New York University. Anyways, he always talks about why diversification is so important. Can you just explain what that is and why it can benefit people?
It's probably one of the most important factors in finance, just as it is with, let's say, diets, your lifestyle, your wardrobe. You need to have a diversified portfolio to make sure that you're not taking too much risk. If you only have white shirts and it's after Labor Day, you will not want to wear that shirt. You're taking a big risk, right? If you have only pasta in your house, you're overloading on carbs. If you have only meat, you're only, eating one thing. So in finance is just as important as it is personally, professionally, just making sure that you're not taking too much risk. In that case, what we say is stock pickers are very concentrated. Most people would say, I have a ton of money in NVIDIA, it's going to the moon, right? And it could be 20, 30, even more like 50, 60% of somebody's portfolio. They might see that gain and say, oh, wow, this is fantastic.
Mm.
But I've seen the days where Nvidia went from, I think it was back in the day, $100 a share that went down to 20. And people were saying, is this company still viable? And this wasn't, too long ago. This was actually fairly recent. And meanwhile, now it's, continued to rocket away. So some people can benefit from diversification, but most people really, they just need to have that ETF. They need to have that line item that says, I have everything. I'm not going to take too much concentration risk, just like I wouldn't in my personal life or my professional life. So diversification is your key.
I also want to talk about an emergency fund.
Yeah.
Why does it matter?
Yes. So the reason for an emergency fund, as we mentioned before, is really just make sure that you have money when you might not necessarily think you're going to spend it. So for example, having a savings fund is like gassing up your car all the way to the top. You can go on almost any road trip. You're confident in it. It's not like you get in your car and you're wondering, oh no, do I have enough to do what I need to do? So it's really important. That way is also a mentally helpful thing to have in your finances, just making sure that you have that on hand in case anything happens. It's like your insurance. You always have that on hand. Now, where to put that money is absolutely critical too. So I mentioned earlier that a checking account pays you about 0%. And if we go all the way back to the inflation part, if you keep it in checking, you're losing money every single day because inflation will continue to increase. So what you want to do with your 3 to 6 months of emergency savings is either keep it in a savings account. So that will earn you a reasonable rate. It's usually a little bit below inflation, especially at a bank. Or you can put it into something like a tax-free savings account and just buy a high interest cash vehicle. So that will basically say, A, I'm not paying tax on any interest that I earn, which is actually highly taxable. And B, I'm always going to be earning a reasonable rate of interest so I can protect that 3 to 6 months. If you left that in checking over, let's say 5-10 years, just as an example, your $10,000 saved will still be $10,000, but the expenses in that 5 or 10 years have probably doubled. So you've lost that purchasing power. So always try and find out from your friends or your advisors where to put your cash savings because it actually is very important.
Now, how much money do you suggest that we keep in that emergency fund? I know you just mentioned 2 to 3 months. I've heard 6 months. I think I personally feel more comfortable 6 months, but.
See, there you go. It's what's your comfort level? There's a listener on this podcast that's probably saying, I don't need that. I probably just need 1 month. Depends on your situation. Do you have a spouse? Do you have a mortgage? Are you shyer with money? Are you more aggressive with money? So these are all rules of thumb. They're not really rules. Let's say they're just guidelines. So it could be 2-3 months. It could be 6, as you mentioned. It could be whatever you're comfortable with, as long as you have something that you're okay with. And as long as it's being invested in the right way.
I remember the first time I spoke with a financial advisor, they said, okay, well, what's your comfort level? What's your comfort level here? Everyone's different.
Yeah, it's important for us to go through that exercise, right? Like taking a risk in a wardrobe. What house do you want? Do you want it to be a fixer upper? A lot of people might say, I don't want to repair my house. I don't want a jalopy of a car. I want something flashy. Everybody's different, right? So the assessment is incredibly important. And you just want to make sure, maybe you say 3 months, and then over time you say, you know what, I don't need that much. Take an inventory of yourself and say, am I comfortable with this? Did I run into any issues last month or last year? If I need to adjust it upwards or downwards, you can always do that. So it's not like it's fixed, but at least pick something for today, take it away from this podcast, and then start to build from there.
Another question one of our listeners had was, if they're paying down debt, what's your strategy for tackling this debt? And they still want to live their life. How can someone still live their life while putting money against their debt account?
Yeah, this is very important these days. There is a significant amount of consumer debt in Canada, in the United States, worldwide, where our generation tends to prioritize spending and experiences rather than saving and buying investments. So what I've seen are a lot of people who might be high income earners, but have a high lifestyle. And a lot of that will go on a credit card. Some people might say, hey, I just want to maximize points, but let's say they're a freelancer and they happen to miss a payment or incurring interest charges. It can really increase from there. So there's 2 ways that we would say you want to pay down your credit card debt. One is called the avalanche method. So the avalanche method is at number 1 step is to hit that button on your credit card payment system that says pay the minimum amount. So no matter what, You have to pay that. So at least you're not incurring this giant charge at the end of the month. From there, any excess cash that you have beyond paying, let's say, your fixed expenses that you can't get away from, you pay down the highest rate credit card first. So some people might have 2 or 3 cards, maybe some student loans or a line of credit. The credit cards tend to be 20 to 22%, which is very high, whereas a line of credit might only be 6, 7, 8%. So right there, the difference is what you would be saving if you pay down your highest interest first. So that's the avalanche method. The snowball method is a little bit more of a psychological benefit. So it depends on the person. But let's say you have 3 credit cards, one with $1,000 balance, one with 5, and one with 10,000. The snowball method would say pay the $1,000 balance off first, because then you know that that one card is done and you only have 2 left. So yes, you've only paid $1,000 of $16,000 of debt, but you've taken that sort of headline credit card and you've moved it off of your plate. So it depends if you want to tackle the highest interest rate first, if you're comfortable with that and seeing all these balances still, or you just say, hey, I just want to close one of these cards and get it out, and then I'll tackle the other 2 after. So it's kind of like you want to pick whichever is most comfortable to you. Generally, what we would see is the avalanche method. Take that highest rate first because you're saving a little bit more right off the top.
I've heard of these methods. I interviewed Anthony O'Neill in the past. He's a best-selling author and he's a financial educator. He talked about this. His story is also really interesting. He has a book called Debt-Free Degree. In that book, he shares how to get rid of your debt. And he specifically teaches people how to shift their mindsets and their daily behaviors so that they can build great wealth. It's really, really fascinating. This guy actually, he was homeless at one point and now he's a multimillionaire, right? He talks about how at a young age, he was given a credit card, but he knew nothing about saving and investing. And so what does a kid do with a credit card? They spend and they spend and they spend. Yeah. And this goes into my next question. And that is, what are some of the biggest mistakes people make with credit cards? And what are some smarter ways to use them?
Yeah, these can be your best friend or your worst enemy. It depends on your financial hygiene, is what I like to call it. But a lot of listeners will say, I spend every dollar on my credit card and I can afford to pay it off in, every month. And I get the points, my credit score is high, and that's what I do. A lot of people here will say, I put something on my credit card, I can't really afford it, but I really need it or want it. And then they say, oh, I don't really have enough to pay for it, but it's okay because I'll just pay for it next month. So the biggest issue with spending on a credit card is not having enough cash flow that month to pay for the entire balance at the end of the month. Mm-hmm. So people will say, I just got approved for an Amex. It's got $10,000 limit. So I have $10,000. It's no, you don't. You actually just took out a loan for $10,000 that they'll start charging you interest on the second you start spending it. So what you want to think about a credit card as is, if you can afford it, you should probably put it on a credit card to get the benefits, to get the warranty protection, the insurance, things like that. But you have to understand that you need to be paying it off every month. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to do that. What I normally also do see are people that say, I just want $1,000 credit card. I just want my limit to be low so I'm not tempted. Now what happens is they'll spend $750, $800 or even max it out and say, well, I only have $1,000 of credit card debt, so it's not a big deal. Now what the rating agencies will say is, well, Harry just spent 100% of his credit limit, so obviously he needs it. And he's probably at high risk of not paying it back. Conversely, if you had a $10,000 limit and you only spent $1,000, that means that the bank has given you authorization to spend $10,000 and you've only taken 10% of that. So they might consider you less of a risk, even though you spent the same amount of money. So you might want to have a better relationship with your credit limit, and also just make sure that you're paying off every single balance in full if you can every single month, so you're not paying interest. And you're not showing up on a credit report that says, Harry missed a payment or Harry only pays the minimum balance, because that will impact your credit score.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic advice. So for me, when it comes to my credit cards, I used to have 2. So now I only have 1. Originally, I paid for a second card. I think we actually had the same card. I won't mention the exact card it was, but it was a cool looking card. And I was like, oh, well, I want to keep this because I like the points that I'll get from it. And then I ended up paying a lot for this card every year. And it was probably year 12. And I was speaking to my dad and I was like, this card is so expensive. And he goes, well, why don't you just get rid of it? And I was like, well, because there's loyalty and, there's loyalty benefits. And he's like, why don't you go look into those loyalty benefits? And so I looked into it, and there are basically no benefits. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to get rid of this card. So I ended up canceling that card. I'm so happy I did. So I now use one Visa and it gets me Aeroplan points. So points to fly Air Canada and all these other things that I can purchase with those points, which is super beneficial to me as someone who always pays their credit card off early. There's benefits to that, which is good. But I could see someone, getting this, again, as I said before, getting a larger credit limit, a higher limit, and using that card because, again, we live in a very tempting world.
Yeah. And a lot of people will get that specific card, Chase Sapphire in the States, Amex Platinum, they want to get that Amex Black. It's almost like a status symbol when you whip out that credit card at dinner and you say, hey, I got this, right? Meanwhile, you're paying $700, $800 a year. You get some benefits from it, but there are ways that you can organize your spending with it. But if you're thinking right now, I only own this credit card for the flash and the flare and maybe some of the benefits, it's probably not right for you. Take a minimalist approach with that, just like you did. Take it, see what your baseline credit card could be. Most people would say a Visa because it typically is accepted everywhere. Amex is most places, but sometimes you'll find some gaps. Maybe you want one of each, but really just try to reduce it. Keep your spending on that card so you can see it in one place, but don't have a card just for that. Like, hey, I got this new card is fantastic, right?
Yeah. There's that social pressure, right? And so sometimes people, feel it, and then that's why they get the card. So I was actually speaking to a friend of mine yesterday, and she has, to me, if you have two cards, but with intention, have two cards. Not a big deal. For me, I'm just like, oh, I just want one one less thing to carry. But everyone does things differently. But I thought this was great. She's like, oh, I put all of these things like food and just toiletries, etc., on one, and the other is travel and going out for dinners, so that she can see those expenses separately when she pulls those documents during tax season. So it's like, okay, if that works for you, that makes sense. Like, it's more organized that way.
Yeah, you can take a good inventory with it. Just again, take ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, whatever you use, and say, hey, I have this card. I also spend generally over here. What would you recommend? There's a lot of engines that can say, here's a good idea, here's a bad idea. Maybe you should switch your card and what have you. A lot of people will be loyal to their bank as well because they get a discount on their card. It might not be the best one for them. So do your homework on it. I'll often talk to my clients about it, but we can't give advice on which credit card to buy. But we can always sort of show some math online that says, here's what you own, and here's another option that we could maybe look at, right? But it depends on who you are. If you're a minimalist and you want one, that's completely acceptable. If you need a Visa and an Amex and you want something for certain points or one for work, or just keep things separate, it's a completely different strategy for everybody. But, talk to your friends, talk online, see what you can research and find the right card for you.
Okay, great. I remember it was around 10 years ago, I think when I first met you, that I started thinking about, I should meet with a financial advisor. And I did for the first time. And I'm sure that there are some of my listeners that have one and others that don't. So at what point should someone consider working with a financial advisor? And what should they look for in a trustworthy advisor?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons to have an advisor, but there's also a lot of people that don't. They don't need us. I think the majority of people these days have the ability to do the investments on their own almost as well as a financial advisor, if not, and certain advisors probably better than them. That's where some people might say investing has been solved, or I can take control of it. I don't need to pay somebody. And that's actually, it does hold some validity. We would say if you are getting a more complex life, you might want to consider the right advice. So for example, let's say you're starting a family, you're buying a house, you've lost a family member, you've changed your jobs, you're looking towards retirement. Those are really, really important life events. And sometimes those are the moments where a financial advisor should be earning their fees and saying, hey, Kelly, here's what I recommend. If you're starting a family, you probably want to start an education savings plan. Here's some insurance, but you don't need too much. There's things that advisors do at those critical junctures that usually earn their fees and more. But if you're a salaried person, single, you're probably in control of your money, then you might say, why would I need to pay for somebody like that? The people in that situation that might lack discipline or just might say, I'm so busy, I really just don't want to do this. I don't want to take any chances myself. Harry, just manage my money for me. That's completely acceptable too. What I would say the most, if you're really starting to get into a more complex life, and you don't have an advisor, that might be a time to really look for one. In terms of trustworthiness, these days it's actually really easy to sort of find which person you might jive with, right? Most advisors will be on some form of social media these days, some more than others, of course. And I'm not saying, bad advisors are off social media. Some of them might just say, I want to avoid it. But you can get a really good sense of them through their LinkedIn profile. If they have YouTube or Instagram, they're most likely have released a few things on their website as well. So you can really get a sense. You can probably do some research online, just in general, forums and things like that. But it's actually somewhat difficult to get a specific opinion on a specific advisor. Usually, if you'd ask around friends and family, hey, do you have someone in your network you trust? Who's a good source of financial information online? And then you really just trust your gut at that point. Does that person give me an ick, right? Does that person say, oh, I could spend 5 hours on a plane with them? Maybe I'll listen to what they have to say, get a sense of what they are and who they are, the company they work for, do your homework. And then if you really just say, in the end, I like that person, they seem to have their head on their shoulders, they seem to have the right, methodology and presence online, then you can say, hey, Harry, I'd love to meet with you. Let's just have a chat. And then from there, you can really get a good sense.
Awesome. Well, we've really got a good sense of you today. And to start to close our conversation today, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you. So quick answers. And just to learn a little bit more about you and share some final words of wisdom with our listeners. So, Harry, how has your relationship with money changed as you've gotten older?
How's it changed? It's become intentional. To use your word, it's very intentional these days. I'm married, so I have a household to consider. It's not just, hey, I want to go to the bar tonight because the Blue Jays game is on. It's, what are Laura and I going to be doing with this money in the next few weeks or months, right? So it's become a lot more intentional, less impulsive, and I have a much more of a fleshed out plan.
Now, what's one piece of financial advice you wish you'd received in your early 20s?
There's a lot.
Yeah,
there's a lot. I wish I could change a lot of things, but I think the main thing is try to put something away, even if it's 5-10%, even if it's $10, just put something away. Because when I was in the 20s, the markets were recovering from the '08 crash, and they've more than quadrupled since then. So that $10 you might have put away when you were less rich could be 40 without having to do anything now. And all those gains will compound even further into my future. So I'd say as soon as you possibly can, take a certain percentage off your paycheck and put it away. If I had done that 20 years ago, things would be a little bit different.
How do you suggest listeners manage financial pressure from social media or peer spending?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of misinformation these days. So I kind of have two things. I sort of alluded to it earlier. It's, what's your gut say about that person? Are they giving you an ick? How do you feel about it? What do you think their motivation is? A lot of people online will say, buy this, buy this, buy this. And then you'll, find out they're not regulated, and they might even be sponsored, by that company to put something forward. So if in an age where there's still so much information, try to have as many sources as you can to verify that. These days, you can use the AI agent to really verify everything. So yeah, just ask, your agent, right? But yeah, really in that case, if it does feel wrong, it most likely is. And just take a step back, take a moment, and then do your homework on it.
Now, what is one question you suggest our listeners ask themselves to help them build a stronger relationship with money?
Yeah, you know what I might say in this case? Circle it all the way back to the beginning and say, what is my why? Right? You say, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? Why do I want to invest? Why do I want to save? So really, you need that plan. You need that seed at the beginning and the reason for doing something. If you don't have it, it's going to be difficult to maintain your discipline. So just say, what is my why? And sort of move forward from there.
Thinking about what your future goals are. What are my future goals? And what do I need in my life today? What is my current income? What are my expenses? Just thinking about all those things first.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's great. I love it. It's very similar to living a minimalist lifestyle. Before starting anything, decluttering anything, think about your why. First of all, why do you want to declutter your home if your home is messy? What is the root of the reason why? Is it because you kind of are feeling like a lack of purpose, or you're feeling high stress, or you're feeling depressed, or any of these things? Then you're going to have, there's going to be something in you that's really driven and motivated, right? And so.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, to try and distill it down for everyone listening still, I'd say the 3 top takeaways really is you want to pay yourself first. Get that 10% immediately, starting today. If you haven't already started it, start it today. Maybe even before then, start with your why. As we just mentioned, get that reason, have a purpose, be intentional about it. And then you want to make sure that you have that emergency fund too. If you have a reason to invest and save, you have 3 to 6 months of savings on hand, and you can save 10% of your paycheck right there, you're probably ahead of 90% of people. So 3 takeaways there, nice and easy for you to do today, and happy to chat about it too.
Those are great, tangible, practical takeaways that our listeners can take with them. So thank you so much, Harry. Now, where can our listeners learn more about the work that you do and potentially working with you?
Yeah, I'm one of those active advisors. So you can find me, harrysalewealth.com. I have a ton of blog posts and content there. My socials are all at Harry Sale Wealth. So you can find me on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. And really, if you just want to get in touch, ask me just a general question, no harm, no foul. Send me a DM on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'm happy to help you. If you do want to meet, my Calendly is on my website. So please feel free, get a sense of who I am. If I'm not your person, that's completely fine. If you do feel like I could be your person, I'm obviously happy to chat with you.
Awesome. And I will include all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much,
Kelly.
Harry. You helped me so much. So thanks so much. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.